Hi, Ron. I'm Lawrence Christophels here with Starboard IT for part three of our ATLC Starboard IT International Trade Series. Today's episode, part three, is all around global infrastructure, local expertise. And what we mean by that is, there's a lot of large players in the supply chain space, international trade space, and many of those countries and companies, I should say, have global contracts with global IT service providers and global platforms that they have to use, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't adapt to local domestic requirements. And in places like Australia, we have very specific transport laws, what we class as chain of responsibility, chain of custody. We have very different reporting laws, different infrastructure requirements. So as much as there's global structures and global platforms, global systems, there's always a need for even the big boys, especially the big boys, to work with local providers to adapt and make sure that their systems are properly in place for their local domestic service providers. So I'm joined here by Steve Kelly here in the studio in Melbourne and Ricky Zappia up in Sydney. Thanks, guys, for joining me for part three. Ricky, I want to kick off with you, mate. I know that I've just done a bit of an intro about what we'll class as MNCs, multinational corporations. I've come from that space. I've worked in that space for many years, and I know how frustrating it can be for a big global player in the supply chain space to be stuck with global platforms, global systems, global IT requirements that simply don't fit into your local market, because you pull your hair out thinking, hang on, that's great for Europe or great for the US, but we're in Australia. We've got different laws, different requirements, different customer needs. So you still need to work with a local team who can bolt on or adapt or put in place fixed solutions such as yourselves to make it work on a local level. So I know you've done that with Starboard. I know you've worked with big multinationals. Can you tell us a bit about that type of experience?
Sure, I can talk about that, Lawrence. So I think in a lot of the times those larger, big organizations are within other large businesses. We work alongside them, and we don't mind working alongside other technology providers or other companies, basically, to get the best from those engagements for you, basically. Um, a lot of the time those engagements or those big players in the market are very large, and therefore there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of coordination that's still required on a local level to maximize your investment from those engagements. And at Starboard, we've worked with many of those companies to get the most out of their large service providers. Things like managing projects, for instance. Sometimes you've got multiple providers that are within an organization, and you might have 3 or 4 or 5 providers that you need to manage on the one project to get an outcome, right, to get a project delivered. And we've done that for our customers as well, as basically tying all the international providers together to get an outcome for the customer.
Yeah, I love it. Some of the things that I've experienced, Ricky, and I'm just listening to you, I can relate to so much, is that the bureaucracy, the red tape, it causes so much frustration. But imagine I've lived this. You're a 3PL provider who does warehousing, distribution, and freight transport. They have big operations, and they are part of global IT infrastructure. But I still need to set up a warehouse locally, so I'll have to get local data fit outs to be done. I need to have someone who does warehouse management systems, local domestic transport management systems in place. I'll need to have security cameras set up that will have to operate in the warehouse. Might even have robotics and IoT or automation desks and stuff. So there's about 4 or 5 IT components to something that we can't wait to actually go to head office overseas to get all these projects handled. They don't have anyone on the ground locally who can, as you say, put all the pieces together of that puzzle, make sure the project in its entirety from an IT perspective all work together seamlessly, and all the data communication flows are working together. So that's really powerful what you put together as Starboard, because just like the supply chain service providers have got multiple stakeholders, all of which need to have really quick, clean, trusted, and secure data transfers, even under one roof within a warehouse environment. It's so unforeseen that people don't realize how many stakeholders and how many fingers in the pie there are just in one 3PL type of operation.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you need to do quickly is, and I've worked internationally throughout my career, is when you get to a country, understanding the brands, who to trust, who not to trust, is key. So having those trusted relationships that we have on the ground here. So we've got relationships with all sorts of supply vendors and all the different vendors that produce hardware and software technologies that need to come together, like building a house.
Yeah.
You have to start somewhere, and you need to know which parts of the puzzle have to go in first, and which one comes in later in the piece. So.
And one of the things that you just mentioned there, Steve, is that, as you said, every domestic market has got a nuances, the right players, the bad players, people to avoid, but also, I mean, if I look at the Australian environment, if you work with companies like Australia Post, Star Trek, Toll, DHL, they've all got their own specific API requirements. They've got their own same data interfaces. So you can't just use a cookie cutter approach. You need to have a company who can actually navigate their way through the proper APIs and establish all of your flows correctly, so that it's not going to get bounced back from your service providers. And that's just on the transport side. So then there's a whole regulation side I want to ask you about, Steve. So Australia is very strictly regulated from a point of view of data, from a point of view of what we class as chain of custody, as I mentioned. So custody of goods and cargo. And the big players, those global platforms and systems that they've already introduced around the world, and they work on a macro level, but they still need to be adapted and partner with some companies such as yourself to actually make it work in the domestic market.
Yeah, sure. Look, depending on your industry, and the financial industry comes across this because it's heavily regulated by APRA. So they've got data sovereignty issues that they need to contend with. But and other industries need to understand what their regulations are and how their data and where their data sits. If their data is sitting in China somewhere and the regulator's saying, no, it can't go offshore, then you've got a problem.
Yeah.
So you need to understand that quickly.
Absolutely. I think even winning contracts or winning tenders is that if you're a big MNC in the supply chain international trade space, literally you're going to be locked out unless you've got the proper ISO accreditation, or you have someone like Starboard who've got their eye over the operation and say, look, when I'm putting forward my RFQ or my proposal to do business with us, I need to say, look, here's our BCP, our business continuity plan. Here's our IT security plan. Here's our remote working plan that we've covered in those first two parts. But also, here's our IT partners. So therefore, you give an added peace of mind on a domestic level to say, do you know what? If I'm going to buy services off you as an MNC in the supply chain or trade space, I need to know that I'm not going to, if there's a blackout for any reason or your systems go down, I don't have to wait for someone in Europe to wake up the next day. I need to have someone on the ground locally, like a Starboard, who's going to address my customer service requirements.
Exactly, yeah. But being responsive is probably the biggest thing in this sort of thing, because with time zones, you can actually lose a lot of time very, very quickly. Yeah. A day just flips by without any response at all. And what that does is anxieties rise, distrust, and all sorts of things that come from that.
Yeah. And that trust part is so important for customer retention. When you're dealing with the big boys, and I know you guys have done all that as well, is that my experience in having multinational contracts is that as soon as you have any distrust around service continuity or the ability to make sure that you're not going to look bad to your customers, you're at risk of losing that contract. And those contracts, especially with the big boys, are typically big multi-million-dollar contracts that you simply cannot afford to lose.
And the other thing I noticed, which sort of come to the front when I first started my international career, was culture. So we all see on TV what we think the culture of a certain country is, but it's not until we get there that we actually fully understand what's going on. And I think there's there's quite a large percentage, Ricky, isn't there, of people in our company that have actually worked abroad in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, very true, very true. And even just the terminologies. I mean, you might have a data field that's called something in Europe, which in Australia totally relates to something else. Some colloquialism that we use as our field description could be as simple as that, could really throw a spanner in the works.
Yeah. And it's just simple work ethics and the way that we work. I remember working in Malaysia, and prayer time was a big thing. And so you don't get any output during those times because the whole workforce is gone. And just simple things like that you need to take account of all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Really, really important. And this is, one of the things that just popped into my head, Steve, when listening to you, is that simple data platforms where zip code fields and the character sets that they can use in a zip file versus a postcode that we use here in Australia. a tiny little thing like that. That data validation tool, it's so important from a global platform to a domestic adaptation, and how you guys can actually do that. Run your eyes over it, work with the company locally, work with their local customers, service providers to make sure it still feeds back into this big global beast.
Sure.
Yeah. Ricky, I want to talk to you about the IT security. And again, we've touched on the MNC environments and these big multinational platforms. Once you go to local domestic providers, you really need to have robust IT policies, procedures, but that security piece. And most companies have got global policies and procedures for their global in-house systems, but they, as we've just talked about, they don't adapt them properly to the domestic policies and procedures. I know that you've done a lot of work in that space. Can you tell us a bit more about that, Ricky?
Yeah, sure. We have done a bit of work in that space, Lawrence. So yeah, I think it's important from a governance perspective. You want to make sure that you have a level of governance within your organization, but you don't want that level of governance to be too cumbersome that it's going to slow down efficiencies and slow down processes. At the end of the day, you want the governance to protect your data and to protect your users, but then also allow your organization to grow and scale. A lot of people look at their company or look at their policies in place now, and then they say, okay, we've ticked the box, we've done that. Now let's focus on growing the business and look elsewhere. They don't go back to those policies they've set and those procedures that they have internally and change them and adapt them to their business over time. For instance, remote working, we touched on the last episode. We had to update a number of our policies, right, to factor in remote working and the new way of working and the new best practices associated with that, and incorporate it into our overall level of governance.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that, as you just pointed out there, Ricky, so many local policies, procedures take place. But even, I look at contract implementation where you've got a global player, and I'm going through my 3PL supply chain experience days, but a global player will have sign-offs and implementation and your zero defect startups and all those type of things you create. But that's on a global infrastructure. But then you need to be able to engage with the company on local timelines, local project management. And I want to ask you both, because I know that you're both heavily involved with that on a bigger project basis, where I can say, look, I'm a big global player. I've just won a contract with ABC company here in Sydney, and we need the local players to all come on board. And we need someone who specialises in data management, security, to bring all those pieces together. It's not my area of expertise. I'm up in supply chain logistics. I need a local project manager from a data perspective and IT perspective to do that for us. And you guys put that together too, don't you?
Sure. First of all, is really just getting all the players together and getting a really big whiteboard out and just dumping ideas and then seeing where it all lands. And then from that, you can actually start formulating some plans, some project plans, and then assigning tasks and getting down to that nitty gritty of getting this thing a schedule, cost, and then getting the outcome of the project.
Yeah, and I think that also provides another value add to the sales pitch, if you like, of the company. If they say, look, we are a global business, we've got the global backing, but we've got local expertise and local project management who will bring together the best of both worlds. You've got the global buying power, the global systems that give you visibility on cross supply chain and trade, but then you've got the local players such as yourself who can really put the glue together and bring all the pieces to make it work.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the business model really is based around build, run, support.
Yeah.
So in simplistic terms, so we can build it, which means in most situations, if it's a sizable project to build, we have to have project management around it to deliver it properly, and then we can run it and support it if it breaks.
Yeah.
So I think that's three really important aspects of IT.
And that support part, again, I know we touched on it a little bit earlier in this episode, but the support part is so critical because you cannot wait for someone to wake up in an overseas country to address a blackout or address something that's gone wrong. And look, one of the things that we've all experienced now with COVID is that it's something can go wrong. It typically will, but especially from a data IT perspective, global companies have probably been impacted the most. The smaller, agile businesses, who can pivot very quickly, the word that everyone gets thrown around these days, is if you're flexible and agile, you can react very quickly. The benefits of the global companies are also their Achilles heel. The fact that these big global platforms, if something goes down on a domestic level, it takes forever to fix, or it's a very costly area that you cannot support quickly unless you've got a domestic partner.
Yeah, navigating their organisation can be hard sometimes to find the person who actually needs to do the fixing, right?
Yeah.
So that is definitely a part of dealing with a big company. They're like big ships out in the ocean. You turn the steering wheel and they
That's
turn
right.
ever so slowly. So
Yeah.
it is a problem.
Well, that leads into my final question, Steve, is what advice and tips would you give to the big boys out in the Australian market, who, and even the regional market? I know you guys work not just limited to Australia, you work regionally as well. Is that I know if I've just lived these experiences as a big player, and I think, you know what? Yes, I know our limitations as a global IT capability. We want to have partnerships with local experts such as Starboard. What are the tips and advice you'd give them?
So one of the things we've found is successful for our business is that if you're a global company that you're dealing with some of the big providers like your IBMs and Dimension Datas, that we can actually come in and actually help bring an outcome to fruition quicker.
Yeah.
Because we haven't got the red tape that these guys have got. We haven't got the big processes of approvals all the way through to Johnny on the ground. We can get in there and start doing the work now. We work well with them. We're not there to compete with them.
Yeah.
We're there to get an outcome for the company.
Yeah, that working with them in the partnership collaboration model that most companies think, okay, well, yeah, look, you know, it's great. We're already covered in that space. Well, hang on, you might be covered in Europe or in the US, and you might think you're covered in Australia, but making sure that collaborative piece to get the faster, more effective outcome. It's like we've talked about in the other couple of episodes in this series, is that you only know what you know. You don't know what the IT world is adapting to, and both of you and the whole team at Starboard are always up to date with the latest security stuff. You send out those updates to your database and to your members all the time, your clients. So there's nothing more beneficial than have a local company here on tap, if you like, to say, well. And the other thing I think about, I don't know if you remember the old political slogan of the Greens back in those days, keeping the bastards honest. I mean, and that's a very true thing when it comes to supply chain. And if you don't know what you're getting out of your IT providers and those big contracts, having third-party independent champions like yourself
generating some tension.
Yeah, it's actually a good thing.
It works.
It really does. Yeah. So look, it's been a really important, powerful series. These 3-part episodes. Ricky, any parting words or advice you want to give to our viewers?
I think, look, if you're not sure what to do with your IT system, or if you're not sure that you've already done everything you need to do from an IT perspective, just give us a call, right? And we can have a discussion and talk about, what it is that you're unsure about or what your needs might be. We offer some services like an initial audit, right? So we can do an initial audit and an assessment of your IT provider. So whether that be your current provider now or your in-house IT team, and look at your systems, look at the technologies, look at your roadmap, and give you some advice on, what would be best practice for you. And you can take that information away, right, and look to use that internally, or look to leverage us to, assist you with those services. So I think, to your point, you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes it's good just to get a second opinion.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Ricky. Yeah, some great words of advice there. And to all of you out there, viewers, we've covered in these three episodes, 3 special 3-part series, as an import and export, all the tips and advice and all the essentials you need to touch base with Starboard IT. Reach out to them. You'll be surprised how they can help improve your import-export business and improve your customer and sales opportunities as well. From a remote working point of view, that was in part 2. We talked about the ways you can put in place proper policies, procedures, safeguards, and de-risk your business from the benefits of remote working and balance that out so it's really effective. And finally, this last part 3, is that local expertise, global infrastructure can work really collaboratively together, and you can get the best out of both worlds and make sure that you've got all the benefits of having global platforms, global contracts, global service agreements with big IT providers, and keep them all integrated and honest with local experts such as Starboard. So thanks so much for joining us on this 3-part series. I hope you found it as valuable and informative as I have. And Starboard are always out there to help you. Very proud partners of ATLC. We really recommend that you touch base with them. You'll definitely won't look back. Thanks very much. We'll see you very soon.